Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to today's Postal Points webinar. We're going to talk about the December 8th issue, the second to the last one of the year, as a matter of fact. And this one has some interesting news about what's going on in the Postal Service and the postal world. The lead article, of course, was the announcement in early December 4th, that Robert Taub, who is now, or who was, a member of the Postal Regulatory Commission, was in fact named to be its acting chairman by the President. Taub is the junior of the current panel and came aboard only a couple of years ago. But he brought with him, as you can see there, considerable experience in postal policy, having worked on the Hill as Chief of Staff for Congressman McHugh, who was involved in postal reform for forever. He was one of the earliest proponents of reform and spent a number of years while he was in the Senate, or in the House rather, trying to get legislation passed. So Taub is a qualified person in terms of knowing about postal issues and postal legislative affairs and so forth, and probably still has many friends in the Hill to whom he can speak about different issues. He's replacing the former chair, Ruth Goldway, who stays on the commission as a commissioner. The circumstances of the commission, and for that matter of the Postal Service's Board of Governors, are getting rather tenuous, not because of anything they're doing, but it's because of vacancies that have developed over the past few years as members of the different panels' terms have expired, and although people have been nominated, sometimes the incumbents, sometimes others, the action on those nominations has been very slow in coming by the Senate. In this case, Ruth Goldway, who, as I just said, was the former chairman, who's been on the commission since 1998, actually her term ended last November 22nd. So she's in what they call a grace year. Everybody who's an appointee on the board or on the PRC can serve an additional year beyond the end of their appointment. So she's good until the end of November or late November next year. In the meantime, of course, there were two vacancies that were on the commission. Nancy Langley and Tony Hammond, both having served out their grace years in 2013, as a matter of fact. Both were renominated, but as of the writing of this issue, neither had been as yet confirmed by the Senate. Now, what you can see there, going on to the at the bottom of the first page into the next, is a little bit of information that we got from one of those informed sources, as you call them. That explains a little bit of the behind the curtain back and forth that led to this situation of Goldway being replaced by Taub. And part of it has to do with a lot of dislike on the part of some members of the Senate, particularly the chairman and ranking member of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. A lot of dislike of former Chairman Goldway because of just her attitude towards things and her approach to travel stuff. She was quite a traveler over her term. And despite criticism of that practice, she continued to do it. So the senators took a bit of a front at this. They viewed her as being a bit of a high-profile person, which is obvious. And so there was resistance to retaining her. Apparently, sometime I guess in the past 6 months, she indicated that she did not wish to continue beyond the end of her current term, or the end of the expiration, I guess next November for that matter. So there was also a search for her replacement. So as you can see there was a deal struck amongst some key senators, we can figure out who those were, that led to her being replaced as chairman by Commissioner Taub. And then in turn, Senator Coburn, who is the ranking member of the Senate committee, he removed his hold on the nominees that have been sitting there for 2 years, Nancy Langley and Tony Hammond. So as it turns out, since this was written, both Langley and Hammond were confirmed by the Senate, and so now you have a commission with all five positions filled. Granted, Goldway's slot is going to be open as soon as he's replaced, but there hasn't been a nominee announced yet to fill that slot, so she's there until next November. So you can see that little explanation of how the constituency of the commission is ranked in terms of expiration. You've got, as I said, Goldway in 2015, Taub and Acton both expire in 16, but they have a grace year to 17. and then we have Langley and Hammond expiring in 18 with a grace year to 19. So that doesn't mean that we're not going to have vacancies. It just means that for the time being we seem to be okay. And of course, as with many political appointees, you have to have a certain partisan balance. So right now, because you've got two of the red members, Acton and Taub, and a third one being Hammond, when you replace Golway, you have to have a second blue member to join Langley to fill out the proper partisan mix. Meanwhile, on the board, they're really in trouble over there because with the expiration of Chairman Barnett's term last week, as a matter of fact, on the day of the issue came out, their number fell below the quorum they have to conduct business. So there was a lot of talk that during the meeting that was held the Friday before, on the 4th, that perhaps the panel made some votes about what to do in the future should certain triggering events occur. And obviously that means that the board, while it had a quorum up until last week, could have passed a resolution authorizing the Postal Service to file a rate change at a specific date under certain conditions, and that would trigger it, of course, to go into action, if you will, even though the board at that actual future date may not itself have a quorum. As you can read there, you've got another Senator Sanders from Vermont, who was perhaps one of the most liberal in the Senate, having placed a hold on board nominee Jim Miller, who of course was on the board before, and who is associated with the Reagan administration and others who are more conservative. So that was one roadblock to a nominee. There are other nominees for other positions, clearly with the number of vacancies they've got, but as of today, as far as I know, the Senate has not voted on any of them. And the Senate is about to adjourn, Congress is about to adjourn shortly, so they can go home and have a nice Christmas knowing what a great job they did in running the country. The problem that exists then is that, like legislation, nominations also die at the end of the current Congress, which means that all the folks who were in the hopper for the Board of Governors or other positions are going to have to be renominated again in January by somebody, should they want to be nominated, and go through the whole cycle of nomination and committee action and confirmation all over again. So what happens then with the new Congress, because it'll be all the same party then? I don't know. Who's going to want to appoint what people to what jobs? Who's going to want those appointments? And what could be the objections of those who have to review them in committee or on the Senate floor? We can only guess. But obviously, as Senator Sanders demonstrated, it only takes one senator to put a hold on a nomination, and all the wheels grind to a halt. But I'm sure I know you'll be hearing more about that as the new Congress opens. Okay, so going on to the next article here, you can see we got a lot of charts there that came out of the Postal Service's, as they call it, Form 10K. It's an SEC form that corporations have to submit, that the Postal Service now also has to submit because of the requirements of postal reform. And because of the cyber attack they had last September, they deferred filing this and a lot of other things while they made sure that their data systems were still accurate, that nothing got tinkered with, and the numbers still added up. So they issued this rather belatedly on the 5th of December, and as you can see, it reported in more detail pretty much all the things that we'd already heard about, particularly those of you who follow the monthly financials. You can see that the Postal Service had a so-so year. It actually, even though it had less volume, 155 and change million pieces or billion pieces, and although its revenue was up to $67.7 billion, you still had the usual problems that you've had in the past: decreasing volume of the key classes of mail, standard and first, very soft volume in standard, which we hope would be higher, of course. And you had the huge burdens of the pre-funding requirement for retiree health care, and this wild swings in workers' comp. So you can read through the whole thing and see pretty much how things have moved. Pardon me. They have a certain number of premises in all their thinking at the Postal Service. We'll talk more about that later. One being that this exigent rate increase, the exigent surcharge as it is going to last a while. You can see that perhaps that 4.3% difference in rates that they got last year made the difference between them losing more money or showing a positive or an increase in their revenue year over year. But as everything can tell you, if you look a little bit more deeply, their revenue did not go up by 5.9%, the size of the rate increase, because of continued evaporation of volume, diversion to electronic media, and to some degree because the Postal Service had to expect a certain amount of volume loss directly tied to the rate increase. Every time they raise their rates, somebody someplace decides, I've had enough of this, I'm going to go to the internet. So that again happened here, I'm sure, and that caused some of the decrease in volume that you can see. Of course, there was some good news. You can look at the volume of shipping and package services and the revenue it generated and see that is, ironically, that is where the Postal Service future seems to be. I can remember not too many years ago in the 1990s when the Postal Service's attitude towards parcels was, we gave up on that business, it's gone, we're not going to worry about it, and they were focusing on first class and standard mail, which at that point seemed like a reasonable thing to do because UPS and FedEx were doing a fine job. They had express mail, which was, stumbling along, and first and standard rather showed no likelihood of ever decreasing in volume. So history, of course, has shown us that was probably the wrong thing to do. But fortunately, the Postal Service has been able to play a little bit of catch-up here and seems to be doing a reasonably good job of regaining some of its volume in package services, particularly priority and ground packages because of relatively attractive pricing. And if you could see a pie chart someplace, I don't have one here, but I've seen them in the past, and I'll send it along to you if I ever do see it. You would see that the proportion of total revenue that is represented by package services is getting close to that of standard mail, even though its volume is about a small fraction, as described there. It's a small fraction of volume, but it's a significant portion of revenue. Going on to the further conversation of expenses, controllable and otherwise, you can see there and on the next page how much different factors represented in terms of expense. Transportation, of course, is one of those issues where you pay to move the mail either by air or by ground, and as the Postal Service is completing its network realignment work, closing plants and so forth, expanding the service area of each, you may well see them able to move some stuff off air transportation and onto ground transportation. But that, of course, is something they'll have to figure out based upon how either will best serve their service standard accomplishment. In the other areas, again, looking at the costs that are associated with workers' comp, the costs that are associated with the pre-funding requirement, those are the lion's share of expense right now. And if it were not for those things, the Postal Service would have probably come close to breaking even if not showing an actual surplus. That isn't the case, and since, of course, as we all know, there's very little chance of Congress getting off the dime this year or next year on anything. The Postal Service gave its proper warning again, saying that we couldn't make the payments last year, we're not going to be able to make the payments next year, so don't get your hopes up. So whatever's been accumulating over the course of the past few years, $20 or $30 billion by the time they get all finished, when the requirement runs out in 2016 or 17, that they will have defaulted on tens of billions of dollars in payments, but somehow the sun comes up, life goes on, and the world keeps turning. They're trying to keep their heads above water under the current arrangement, but as they say, they continue to suffer from a lack of liquidity. As I believe was reported in the past, that liquidity challenge has softened somewhat. They now have a good deal longer they could run on their cash available than they could at one point a few months ago, but they're still not out of the woods. In the next article, we talk a little bit about some thoughts, kind of a commentary on some thoughts for the new PMG. Megan Brennan, of course, will take over the Postal Service the 1st of February. And, it's one of those times when you have sort of a honeymoon. It's a chance for her to make her own mark with Congress, her own mark with labor, her own mark with the industry. And there are just some thoughts there about what, how she could do this. As far as Congress goes, there's no point in going in, not having a positive attitude and saying how things could go, making her own impression, talking to these people herself, setting herself apart from the prior PMGs, giving people in Congress her own, giving them an impression of her own perspective, her own priorities, her own approach. But on the other hand, you shouldn't be so optimistic as to think they really care, because as we all know, the purpose of people in Congress is to get reelected, and if going along with what she wants is not going to support that objective, then they'll be less inclined to be sympathetic to what she's thinking. Same goes to postal labor, really. The postal unions, of course, two of them are going to have contract negotiations next year. How they approach negotiations, their attitude toward the issues that are going to be on the negotiating table, all of those things are going to be in some way affected by their relationship, their attitude, the relationship with the Postal Service, the PMG, and their attitude towards all those things. You know, there's no corner in the market of smart people or hardworking people in either the labor force or management. So, you know, with that in mind, she still has to make her deals with the unions and get along with them. But as we've seen in the past, too often PMGs, especially back in the old days, made deals with the unions to get peace, to get them to do with whatever we wanted them to do, whatever they wanted them to do, and that came back to bite them in the end because of ongoing labor costs, ongoing perks and benefits that nowadays are no longer affordable. But just as with Congress, of course, the labor unions leaders are people who were elected by the rank and file, and the rank and file oftentimes is the dog wagged by the tail of the radicals. So keeping that element of each union in check, of course, requires the labor leaders to say things and do things that probably satisfies that group, but may not be in the long-term best interest of their organization. And in turn, that may be one of those things where no matter how nice the PMG tries to make with the unions, it won't make any difference because in the long run they're going to do what they want to do anyways. The last thing is the industry. And the point we're making there is, no offense to anybody at MTAC, but MTAC is not the industry. MTAC consists of 180 or so people who come from companies that can afford to send them to D.C. 4 times a year. And there are tens of thousands of mailers out there all over the country, ratepayers, who will never get themselves into D.C. to sit in the MTAC meetings. And our only advice to the PMG in this case is, it's important to get along with the big boys, with MTAC and the major mailers, major associations, but don't forget the fact that out there behind all of them, beyond the Beltway, there's a lot of population of people who will never have the resources that some of the larger companies have. And making decisions that favor the larger companies sometimes can cause a lot of problems and headaches for the smaller companies who don't have the people, the staff, the firepower, the money, and the equipment, the hardware, or the business to participate in some of the things that, in all good meaning, the Postal Service agrees to do with some of the larger members of the industry. So anyways, that's the 2 cents that we gave to PMG, to incoming PMG Brennan, so we'll see what happens. The next long article gives you a report on hearings in the House, rather, on the data security issues. Of course, at the time, the data security issue was primarily the data breach that occurred in September that was reported sometime later after a number of issues were resolved or considered. And secondarily, the story that came out a month or 2 ago in the New York Times about the mail cover program that's been around forever, that all of a sudden became a big issue because of how it was portrayed in the Times. You can see in the box on the right there the timeline of things and how the Postal Service and those who advised it felt they should keep the whole thing quiet until they figured out who'd been tiptoeing through what data systems. And probably that was a prudent thing to do, so you wouldn't tip off whoever's in there. You could watch what they're doing and see where they're snooping. That, of course, was not something that satisfied a lot of the people who were on the committee, who had, because they're, of course, in Congress, they're much smarter than anybody else is. So they have a lot of comments to make about who did what and what was going on, notwithstanding the defense that was offered by the Randy Miskanik from the Postal Service. Other commenters, testifiers, I guess, testimony that was from the Chief Postal Inspector and the Deputy Inspector General over the IG's office, both of whom spoke about the mail cover program and tried to emphasize that the mail cover program is not an abuse of personal privacy, but rather a tool used for law enforcement. It's been around forever. It's tried and true. And that the IG's point was simply that the process that oversees the program was not always being followed, not that there were abuses of it, not that there were people, poking through your mail. They're not opening mail except by a court order. So they tried to calm down the hysteria in that regard. But of course, then the next witness, this guy from Brown University, began going off in the same direction, saying that, all Postal Service snooping and whatnot, and there's nothing sacred. So at the end of the day, you had the typical House hearing where you had politicians up there saying what they thought they could say to get a headline, witnesses being brought up there to offer different perspectives, and then everybody got finished and went home, and that was that. Meanwhile, of course, the Carriers Union, as you can see in the box at the end of the article, the Carriers Union decided that they were quite upset because the Postal Service didn't talk to them about the breach and give them a chance to bargain over what to do about it. And with all due respect to the fact that there are issues that affect the employees here, some would say that there were a lot more important issues, a lot more important fires to put out at this point, and calling the Carriers Union and saying, what would you like me to do about this? And of course, again, you had the issue of was it appropriate to discuss this with anybody outside the building while they're still trying to figure out what happened. Anyways, the next article talks about the Congressional Budget Office and how they've come up with a somewhat belated evaluation of a provision that was kicking around in different bills in the now ending Congress that would pick up on an IG's report suggestion to convert delivery from door delivery to curbside, or better yet, to centralized delivery. And this is somewhat belated because, as we talked about before, both of the bills that contain provisions like this are going to die at the end of the current Congress, which is going to happen any day now. But just the same, they gave their estimates and showed pretty much what the IG had said, that there's a lot of money here, billions of dollars that are available to the Postal Service in terms of savings from changes to delivery. As you can see in the chart there that came from the CBO, the way that the CBO puts it things, the way the federal budget does things, is they lay it out over a 10-year sunset, a 10-year period. So whether it's how they spread the pre-funding payments for retiree health care, or how they calculate the savings that could accrue from conversion of delivery, they show it over a 10-year period. Now, this is not something which the Postal Service is likely to undertake on their own, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the idea of making people move their delivery point from their front door to the curb or down the block to a centralized delivery box is not going to be popular. So until the Postal Service is compelled to do this, they're probably not going to go out and voluntarily be shot at for one more thing by the average person, or by newspapers all over the country, or by other congressmen who don't think it's a good idea. They'll just wait until they're compelled to do so, and then at least hopefully they'll have a chance to say, well, Congress made us do it. And at that time, Congress may concurrently give them some money to do it with, and some cover from criticism. But we'll see how this plays out. Anyways, CBO finally came up with this estimate, somewhat belatedly, saying that, well, we already knew there's a lot of money available. The next article gives you a snapshot of the Postal Service's Integrated Financial Plan for 2015, for fiscal 2015, and it really doesn't say that they're going to be dancing the streets next year any more than they have in the past. They expect to see the same situations continue, very tight revenues, continued costs out of their control for retiree health care and workers' comp. Revenue they expect to see go up a little bit, but not a lot. Expenses they hope to keep relatively under control, and they expect to see volume, that again is going to do okay, but nothing to write home about. As we talked about before, shipping and package services is where they expect to see growth, 13% growth in 2015 for the whole group. And if that happens, of course, that will bump up the revenue from shipping and package services even closer to that of standard mail. Thank heaven it's there, because the revenue from first class will continue to drop. As we talked about before, certain assumptions underlie this. The first of all is the Postal Service assuming that Congress will do nothing about reform of any kind, which is probably a pretty safe assumption. They're expecting to see the exit increase stay in place too, which means that the revenues they were authorized to have, the billions they were authorized to have through the surcharge, they expect to finish collecting in 2015. As you saw before, in other issues, when we projected that surcharge, it would run out sometime late summer, early fall of 2015, because that's the pace at which the money was being collected, and the cap that the PRC set would be reached at that time. Again, you can read through all this here and see what's going on. At the end of the year, they expect to have $5.2 billion in the kitty, which again is only about 19 days of cash flow. So that's too little, even though it's a lot of money, obviously, but for them it's too little at the rate that they go through cash on a day-to-day basis. The next two articles give you the financials for September, the last month of the Postal Service's fiscal year, and October, the first month of the new current fiscal year, the fiscal year 2015. And you can see that, well, September was, again, another so-so month. You had some black ink, some red ink, some things were good, some things were bad. Revenue was kind of, even, but again, volume was down. So what you're seeing is the effect, the lingering effect of some of the rate increase that was imposed at the start of the year. October was a very good month, as a matter of fact. October revenue was higher than planned and higher than the last October, perhaps because of some of the election volume that we see every so often. There's election, of course, off-season election, as you know, in November. So even though first class was down again, even though periodicals was down again, Standard Mail took a big jump in October. And if you scroll down to the next month, you can see that October was quite a good month, as I said. Expenses for the month were high, of course. Moving the mail cost money, and so there was some higher than expected cost in that regard. But we'll see how things shake out in November. November, of course, won't have the benefit of the election. November won't have that bump in revenue and volume as we saw. So again, we may go back into the same puddle we've been in before to figure out what's the future of the Postal Service's revenue picture. I'm looking at the questions we have here. Let's see here. Does a recommended postage increase have to come to the Board of Governors? If so, what happens with the lack of a quorum? Yes, only the Postal Service's Board of Governors can approve a rate filing. And as I said, if they don't have a quorum, they can't vote on it, which is why when they did have a quorum, they may have put in place an authorization to be implemented or triggered at a future date. If next month, or in fact this week, if the cost of living increase for so the CPI figure for November comes out, or October rather if that comes out and shows the cap as being a little bit higher, that may be a trigger for the Postal Service to act. Maybe the governors voted to say that if the cap is 1.9 is 2%, whatever, we're authorizing you to file a rate filing within 90 days of that occurrence. As I said, it'll come out the 17th, which would be, let's see, on Wednesday. And as you can see at page 2 of the issue, the calculation now is not the usual 12-month interval, but it's a different formula now. So the price cap is actually about 0.2% higher than would otherwise apply. So if that goes up again, as it may well do, when it's calculated in this Wednesday based on the November CPI data, then they very well may be able to implement what they were authorized to do. Let's see here. Can address the latest rumor about potential increase in April. Well, the April date surfaced because there was an MTAC work group call talking about some of the different things that are planned for this year in terms of promotions and incentives, and the target for getting those in place was April. And the conversation failed to adequately consider the fact that the promotions themselves have to be approved by the PRC, which in turn requires a rate filing. So the shorthand conversation led some people to believe that it was a done deal, that there would be a rate case to be implemented in April. Of course, that wasn't the situation. Since then, events may have overtaken that. They very well may have been a vote last week authorizing a filing at some time in January that would be implemented in April. So there could be one anyways. The last I heard of MTAC was that if there were not a regular rate filing, or a price change filing, that there would at least be one in order to move forward with the promotions on the schedule that they had discussed. So that may well be the sum of it. But of course, like everything else, we have to wait and see what's going to happen here. Let's see, no more questions, I don't think. So let's see, that would take us to the end of the conversation on the issue. As you can see, there's not much going on in the postal bulletin. There was a labeling list change that was announced after this. You'll see in the next issue. You have your schedule there for labeling list, the mail direction file changes, and you can see the different deadlines by which they have to be implemented. And you can make sure that your software provider is sending you the right updates to be included in your processing software, mail preparation software. Otherwise, that's it for today. Thank you to AccuZip for being our sponsor as always. The next issue of Postal Points will come out in 2 weeks from today, and at that time we'll have it's the last issue of the year. So the next webinar would be 3 weeks from today in early January. Meantime, thank you for calling in. I hope that you got something out of today's issue, and we hope to hear from you in the future on another Postal Points webinar. So until that time, thanks again for calling in. Stay out of the hot sun.